What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 5 preview. So I'm going to go through some notes from last night's matches. We had Carabao Cup and European games. Talk about Game Week 5 Wildcard versus 6 and 7, and then answer some of your questions as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, let's get into it. So I wanted to start with some notes from last night's matches because we had Carabao Cup games and European games as well, and there was some interesting information from an FPL point of view. So for Aston Villa, Ollie Watkins was subbed early again for Duran around the 60th minute, and he was pictured on the bench with ice on his ankle. Now, I wouldn't be particularly worried about that. I think that kind of thing happens way more often than we realise for players after games. I'd be more concerned about the early sub because it keeps happening, and Duran is playing so well, Unai Emery has to give him game time. And I just think because of that, Ollie Watkins doesn't have to play 80 to 90 minutes every match like he would have done last season. And that makes him a slightly worse FPL option than he would have been last year. Now, I know people owned him last week. He got 2 goals. They're probably really happy that I'm saying this stuff. They want less people to buy Watkins. I still think he's a good option, but I wouldn't be completely happy about the amount of times that he's being subbed for Duran, and obviously how well Duran is doing when he comes on as well. Unai Emery has mentioned that it's up to him to find a way to have both of them in the same team, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen. And if it does, it doesn't mean it's going to happen soon either. It might just be that the early substitutions happen. So I think because of his price, that would probably put me off Watkins right now, but he's certainly not a terrible option. In terms of other players from that game, Morgan Rogers started again. He didn't play the full match, but he got over 80 minutes and still looks pretty good to me going forward. It's quite funny that in that Aston Villa team last night, most midfielders and forwards got an attack and return of some kind. Morgan Rogers didn't, once again, even though he looked good. But I just think those returns will come. And he is just an 8th attacker, no more than that. It might be that if Duran and Watkins play together that Rogers steps out. But it could be that he just moves to the left. I think right now we don't overthink it. The fact that he keeps starting is a positive. For Liverpool, Diaz and Robertson were benched. Gakpo and Tsimikas started. And Arne Slot said that he initially planned to start Gakpo against Forest in Game Week 4, but Diaz came back from internationals in better condition fitness-wise. That just nails home for me that Diaz is a rotation risk and not as good as an FPL option as the points so far probably tell us. And I get it, right? He might go and start the next 4 games. No, sorry, he might start 4 of the next 5 games and absolutely smash it like he has done. But I just think with midweek matches now starting, that's going to become more of a risk for FPL. So personally, Slot saying that will completely put me off buying Diaz. And look, Gakpo started last night, so Diaz will probably start at the weekend. Anyone that owns him probably shouldn't be too concerned. But moving forward, you're always going to have this slight worry. Jota started last night. He came off, I think, just before the 70th minute. I think he'll probably start again at the weekend because Darwin Núñez hasn't really shown a huge amount when he's come on so far. But at some point, that could be a rotation threat as well. Also, the fact that Tsimikas started in the game against Milan, it kind of puts me a little bit off Robertson as well, because it just shows that Slot is happy to make a change there as well. Maybe he won't do that in the league. Maybe he'll only do it in the odd Champions League game. I still think Robertson's probably fine, but it has spooked me a little bit. Probably not enough to ignore Robertson though, but Diaz, the fact that Gakpo was going to start in Game Week 4, personally I just won't go there. He could absolutely do enough damage in the limited game time he gets, or if he starts, plays 60 minutes, he can do well. We've already seen it, but that's enough for me to ignore him. Muniz started for Fulham. It was pretty much a Fulham B team. And some people said to me on Twitter that maybe they're trying to play him into form. I think he's just done as an option. If you've got him and you've got someone else you can play instead, you don't have to rush to get rid of him. But he's a non-option moving forward for now. Sharda for Brentford, I spoke about in yesterday's video. He started up front. But Carvalho was on the right and he got 3 attacking returns. So this is how Brentford lined up. It was Sharda through the middle, Damsgaard on the left, who finally got a goal for Brentford, and then Carvalho on the right. So 1 goal, 2 assists for him. I think it's good news that Sharda was played there because you could frame it that Thomas Frank needs him moving forward in the league, and so he wanted to give him some time there. But the fact that Carvalho started on the right and did really well does mean that we could see Carvalho on the right and Burmo through the middle, and then Lewis Potter on the left. Basically, what I'm trying to say is Sharda at 5.4 million as a midfielder could be great playing as a number 9, but I certainly wouldn't say that he's completely nailed on. It might be worth going for him because of the fixtures that Brentford have Game Week 6 onwards and what he could offer for that price. but don't buy him thinking that he's like a Dwight McNeil where he's going to play every single game. Also, yeah, just going back to the Brentford lineup, Vandenberg was next to Ben Mee. And I said this, Vandenberg started against City, and he'll probably start against Spurs if they play a back five. But when they move back to a back four, Vandenberg is not nailed to start. And the fact that he played alongside Ben Mee makes me think that Pinnock and Collins are the main two when they play a back four in the Premier League. Vandenberg may come in at some point, but I wouldn't necessarily rely on that right now. And with the information we've got, I'll be ignoring him on Wildcard 6, I think. So Vandenberg, potentially an option in the future. I'm not sure he is right now. Rashford keeps scoring 2 goals for Man United last night. I will say, though, they beat Barnsley 7-0. Even Eriksen got 2 goals as well. So I wouldn't put too much thought into that. But Rashford does sometimes go on these streaks. You know, people will say he's like a confidence player. Maybe that streak is about to happen. He's only 6.9 million. There are worse punts out there that you could go for. And I wouldn't say that Rashford is nailed, but I don't see him getting dropped from the 11 anytime soon. And that brings me on to Amad Diallo and Garnacho. Garnacho started. He played really well too, although again, the opposition was much lower quality than you get in the Premier League. But the fact that Amad was benched means that he probably starts the next game. So Amad and Rashford is where it's at. Personally, I think Garnacho is too good to leave out. I think Ten Hag's got to get him in that team, but that's not what's happening right now. And Amad Diallo is playing really well. And as long as that continues, he will keep his spot. So you could look at Amad Diallo as a cheap option in midfield. Garnacho, I really want. I want to put him in my wildcard in game week 6, but I just don't think I can. I think you just got to ignore him. Despite the fact that he keeps getting points off the bench, that won't last forever. And then Calvert-Lewin wasn't in the squad for Everton. But Sean Dyche said, we hope to get the 3 with illness, so Mykolenko, Calvert-Lewin and Garner, back. We're hopeful on Tarkowski, but the rest are unlikely. So it sounds like Tarkowski's got a bit of a knock, and he could be back. Calvert-Lewin was ill, which is why he wasn't in the squad. I think he'll play at the weekend, but let's see what he says on Friday ahead of the matches when we get the press conferences. So when I asked for questions yesterday, someone said to me, can you talk about Game Week 5 wildcard versus Game Week 6 or Game Week 7? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you a couple of different drafts in just a second. But first of all, I want to go with a broad overview of those different wildcard windows. So for Game Week 6 in particular, the main reason people are looking at that is Arsenal have a little bit of a fixture swing. So in Game Week 6, they got Leicester at home. Game Week 7, it's Southampton at home. And then Game Week 8, it's Bournemouth away. So most people will want to get 2 or 3 Arsenal players. And obviously you can do that very easily on a wild card. Also, Brentford have a fixture swing as well, where all of a sudden they got West Ham at home, Wolves at home, Man United away, Ipswich at home in the next 4. And even after that, the fixtures are great. So getting players in like in Burmo, possibly Sharda, maybe Flecken as well, is all things that people will be looking at. And also, Liverpool's really good run comes to an end. Now, it doesn't mean they've got terrible fixtures all of a sudden. Wolves away and Palace away are not bad. But compared to the first 5, the fixtures for Liverpool are worse. So Liverpool have had Ipswich, Brentford, Man United, Forest, and obviously Bournemouth in Game Week 5. But the next 4 game weeks after that are 2 away games against Wolves and Palace, and then Chelsea at home and Arsenal away. So you might want to increase the amount of Arsenal players you've got and decrease the amount of Liverpool, and also bring some Brentford in. And obviously, if you're on a draft with no Haaland, he's also someone that you might want to bring in as well. As for Game Week 7, there wouldn't be a huge amount of differences apart from the fact you missed the Newcastle away game for Man City in Game Week 6, which doesn't look that bad, to be honest. But you come into Man City's really good fixture run as well. So they've got Fulham at home in Game Week 7, then Wolves away in 8, and then Southampton at home in 9. So if you haven't got Haaland, you're probably going to want him for those fixtures, and maybe 1 or 2 others as well. So that seems to me like the primary reason some people are looking at Game Week 7. For what it's worth, I think most people will go in 6 or 8 rather than 7, but it depends what works for your team. You have to individually look at that yourself. For Game Week 5, I think it's a little bit awkward, but doable. And the reason it's awkward is because you're going to want Man City and Arsenal players moving forward, but they play each other in Game Week 5, and that's a difficult game. Now, for someone like Raya, it might not matter because you can just play him against Man City and you've got him for the long term. For someone like Gabriel or Saliba, you could just bench them. And if you've got to play Haaland against Arsenal, it's not the end of the world, but it's not a fun fixture to wildcard into. So I think Game Week 6 is a little bit awkward. Also, and this all comes down to personal preference, when I wildcard in 6, I probably won't go for Salah, but in Game Week 5, I'd really want him to captain him against Bournemouth. So it's a little bit of an awkward window to wildcard in, But if you're looking at a squad with a bunch of issues right now, like rotation risks and stuff like that, it could still be doable. But I feel like you've got to pre-book some transfers. So here's what I would do, and I know I'm waffling a bit, but hopefully you're following along. I would build a wildcard 6 draft, first of all. So what I'm showing you on screen is the players and the fixtures from game week 6. Now, you don't have to set your squad up exactly like this. You should play around with it yourself, but this is something that you could go for. So just to read it out, I've got Raya in goal and Gabriel in defence. So Arsenal double up, Leicester at home, Konza against Ipswich away, and I'll show you why I've got him in just a second. Trent against Wolves away. Then the midfield is Eze, Mbeumo, Saka, Sharda, and Bowen. And then Calvert-Lewin and Haaland up front. And then on the bench, I've got Fabianski, just a 4 million goalkeeper. João Pedro, as long as he's fit, we'll find out hopefully on Friday. Pedro Porro, and then Greaves as my 4 million defender. So the reason that I would build a wildcard 6 draft is because I know I want those Arsenal players and Haaland moving forward. So I've got Saka and Haaland. That's the key point of this, right? Then I would work backwards to what it would look like in game week 5. So this is what that same team looks like in game week 5, apart from the fact I've swapped Haaland for Watkins. That could be any forward you want, and then Saka for Salah. Because I don't want Salah and Haaland together moving forward. I want to spread that money around my squad. And so I've taken Haaland out to be able to fund Salah. I will captain him in game week 5, and then I'll leave the rest of the money in the bank. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So what I've done here is build a wildcard 6 draft, first of all. Then I've taken Haaland and Saka out, and I've put in Watkins and Salah in their place, and I've got 3.6 million in the bank. And I won't spend that because I know I'm going to want to bring Haaland back in. I'm just going to dodge him in game week 5 for Arsenal at home and captain Salah instead. Now, for what it's worth, if you're limited on transfers or you're just too afraid of going without Haaland, just build that game week 6 draft and play it in game week 5 and just don't go for Salah. But I just think moving forward, I wouldn't want both of them. And I wouldn't, like, the problem is, I really don't know if I'm explaining this properly. If you put Haaland and Salah in game week 5, then you've got to limit the amount of money you spend elsewhere. But then from game week 6 onwards, you might not want Salah. So I think the easiest way is to go without Haaland this week and then look to bring him back in. So if you've got 2 free transfers, in game week 6, you could sell Salah and Watkins to Saka and Haaland. Or if you've only got 1 free transfer, you can do Salah to Saka if you want to, or you could just hold Salah. It's up to you. And then you get Haaland in game week 7, right? Does that make sense? Probably not. So this is what the wild card looks like. This is my game week 6 draft. So yeah, basically Haaland and Saka go out. You put in Salah and then just any forward you want. It doesn't even have to be Watkins, right? It could be Solanke against Brentford at home. Whatever it is, you just know that those 2 players are the 2 players you're selling for Saka and Haaland later on. Either in game week 6 you can do one or both, or game week 7 you can do one or both. So hopefully that's kind of made some kind of sense. Basically, I think game week 6 is probably better than game week 5. Game week 5 is a little bit awkward, but some of you might need it, and it's definitely doable. You've just got to be prepared to go without Haaland for maybe 1 or possibly 2 weeks, because you can captain Salah in 5, and if it comes down to it, Salah against Wolves away in 6, or Saka against Southampton at home, or Leicester at home. Oh my God, I'm all over the place. Basically, Salah against Bournemouth at home in 5 and Saka against Leicester at home in 6 is fine, right? And you can just go without Haaland until game week 6 or 7. I'm going to leave it there because I'm just rambling, but yeah, game week 5 is fine, but I'd wait till 6 if you can. All right, let's move on to some of your questions. So is Leif Davis the best 4.5 million defender to go for right now? He's very attacking, and Ipswich have good fixtures until game week 16-ish. Now, I'm not sure I'm prepared to say he's the best 4.5, but he's certainly one of the options that I will be looking at if I wildcard in game week 6. I love the fact that he's attacking, love the fact that he's nailed as well. I was having a look at the fixtures though, and I'm not sure how many of the ones in the short term I'd really be banking on clean sheets. And I get it, right, he can go and get you an attacking return as well. That's part of the appeal. But clean sheets are the bread and butter for a defender, and you really want to be able to rely on them in some way. And I'm not sure there's a huge amount for Ipswich. Like, even in game week 5, I like the fact they're playing against Southampton, but it's the away game, which is not ideal. Then it's Villa at home. Like, does anyone expect Villa not to score against Ipswich? Probably not. Then it's an away game against West Ham. Everton at home in 8, I like. Brentford away in 9. I know they've lost Visser, and obviously Tony's gone, Thiago's injured, but I'd still expect Brentford to score at home to Ipswich. Like, if I've got Mbeumo, I'm sure if he's done well before that, people will start talking about him as a captaincy option. So I don't see a clean sheet there. And then Leicester at home in 10 is good. Then you've got Spurs away and Man United at home. So if I'm looking, and then even after that, it's Forest away. So if I'm looking at game weeks 5 to 13 and thinking about when I'd want to play him for a clean sheet, possibly against Southampton away this week, and then Everton at home in 8, Leicester at home in 10, I'm not sure how many you're getting outside of that. And obviously, the attacking potential is there. It's great to get goals and assists from defenders. But I feel like clean sheets are still the bread and butter, and I don't see a massive amount. But he's only 4.5. You can use him as part of a rotation. I'm just pointing out why I wouldn't say he's absolutely the best option, because there's not a huge amount of games there you'd necessarily want to go out of your way to play him in. That being said, promising that they got a clean sheet against Brighton away, although they did concede 1.66 expected goals, which is not great. But I do like the attacking threat. 0.17 expected goal involvement against Brighton, 0.26 against Fulham at home. Even against City, it was 0.1, and that was an away game against one of the best teams in the league. So that is impressive. So I like him, and I will definitely consider him on Wildcard 6. And I think if you wildcard in 8, you're probably even more likely to look at him, because then you've got the Everton home game straight away and then Leicester in 10. But I don't think he's certainly not anywhere close to being essential, and you certainly don't have to go out of your way to get him in your squad. I mean, I guess the follow-up question that some people might have is, well, if you're not saying he's the best 4.5, who is? But I think Anya at Forest, or any of the Nottingham Forest defenders, look good. Like Palace at home in 8, Fulham at home in 9, probably quite a good shot at a clean sheet. Even West Ham at home in 10 is not bad. Ipswich at home in 13, pretty good. And Forest defensive numbers have been decent for a long time now. Man United defenders you're probably not going for right now, but later on from kind of game week 8 onwards, Man United do have a fairly good fixture run. And I still haven't lost complete hope with someone like Konza or Pau Torres at Villa. And again, if you look at the short-term fixtures, Wolves at home, Ipswich away, and even Bournemouth at home in 9, in the short term, they're probably better than Ipswich. So I'm not trying to put people off going for Leif Davis. Like I said, I'm going to consider him for my wild card if I go for it next week. Is he the best? I probably wouldn't say that, but he's definitely an option you should consider. So is a 1 week punt before wildcard 6 to go from Saliba to Porritt or Robertson worth it? Or should we just roll the transfer? Now, this is one of those questions where if it was last season, I would say make the move, because you're going to lose your transfer after you wildcard, but that's not the case anymore, so it needs a bit more thought. My gut instinct is that I would keep Saliba. I'd rather have that transfer after the wildcard, just to leave me a bit more flexible in case things go wrong. And obviously the idea is that you wildcard, then your squad looks great for weeks. But as we've seen after game week 1, stuff can happen, right, where you need those transfers. So I think I'd rather play Saliba. I don't think there's a very high chance of Arsenal getting a clean sheet, but if any team can do it, it's them. They will make that game difficult for Man City. We saw that in the same fixture last season. But obviously on the flip side, it's hard to see Haaland going through any game right now without scoring. But I think I'd rather just have that transfer. Obviously, Porro's got Brentford at home. Robertson's got Bournemouth at home. So there is a chance for a clean sheet and attacking returns. And if that happens and Saliba concedes, you're going to wish you've made the move. But I think without that hindsight, I'd probably rather just roll it. For what it's worth, and I know this is going to sound stupid now because we do have hindsight, but I think if you were going to sell Saliba for, let's say, Robertson, the time to do it was last week, before Saliba had Spurs away and Man City away, and Robertson had Forest at home and Bournemouth at home. Now, obviously, you didn't make that move, and that now looks great because Saliba's got a clean sheet and Robertson's conceded, but that was probably the time to do it without hindsight, right? So I would probably just leave it now and just go into the wildcard with an extra transfer. So can Trent be looked at as a viable captaincy option for those without Salah? Now the short answer is yes. If you're ever going to captain a defender in FPL, Trent Alexander-Arnold is one of the main players to look at. We know what he's capable of. Liverpool have 3 clean sheets in the first 4 games. Yes, they didn't get one against Forest at home, but that wouldn't put me off massively. And we know he's capable of big things going forward as well. He doesn't have any attacking returns in the Premier League so far, but he did get one in the Champions League last night, right? So is Trent capable against Bournemouth at home of getting 8, 9, 10 points plus? Absolutely. That being said, I find it very difficult to captain defenders, and it's not logical reasoning, but if that clean sheet goes, it feels like that's game over for your captaincy straight away. Trent could concede to Bournemouth very early on, then go and get a goal or assist. We know he can do that, but it's not that likely, right? As attacking as he is as a defender, he's not going to be as attacking as most of the midfielders and forwards that are in your FPL squad. So I still don't like it. And like I said, it's not a logical reason. Trent is a great pick this week. That's why I've got him in my team. And he absolutely could do well as a captain. I just hate captaining defenders. And I'm telling you now, lots of people watching this video, if you captain Trent, that clean sheet goes, it's going to ruin your weekend from an FPL point of view. So I don't think he's bad, but personally, I just can't go there. Also, I don't think it's necessarily correct to look at it that I don't have Salah and therefore I've got to captain a Liverpool player. You can just captain someone from a different fixture. Like, take my squad, for example, for this week. I will probably buy Salah. It's not 100% certainty. Depends whether I definitely wildcard in 6. But let's say I don't buy him. Well, I've got Trent, but he's not my automatic thought for captain. I'm just going to captain Haaland, right? It doesn't have to be someone from that Liverpool game, okay? Like, if Salah's the best option, it doesn't mean the second best option is also from Liverpool. Like, I wouldn't captain Jota or Diaz, for example. Well, I might do, depending on what the rest of my squad looked like. But let's say I had Jota instead of Fernandes. Just because I haven't got Salah doesn't mean I'd automatically go to Jota, because I'd be worried about him coming off after 60 minutes, whereas Haaland's going to play 90 against Arsenal. So Trent's fine. If you want to captain him, you absolutely should. I don't see myself doing it, though. So is Dwight McNeil being overlooked? He scored 6 and 12 points in the last 2 game weeks. Now, just as a side note, whenever anyone asks me whether a certain player is being overlooked, I know what they're really asking me is, are they a good option moving forward? But if I answer it quite literally, the answer is yes, McNeil is being overlooked, and probably rightly so. Because when you're looking at what transfers to make for your squad week to week, you need to prioritise the biggest and best move you can. And often that is not bringing in a 5.4 million midfielder. Like, if you're on Wildcard this week or next week, you're probably going to look at him because Everton's fixtures are great, he's cheap, and he's nailed on. If you want to downgrade a midfielder to make another move elsewhere you need funds for, then you'd look at him. But if you're sat there with one free transfer, most people probably don't have a midfielder, which makes sense to bring in McNeil. So it probably makes sense to continue to overlook him, even though he's not a bad option moving forward. Anyway, that's just a side note. That's what I think about every time someone says, is this player being overlooked? But back to what you really want to know, is Dwight McNeil a good option moving forward? I think yes. I think the fixtures are pretty good, right? From this week, they've got Leicester away, Palace at home, Newcastle at home, Ipswich away, Fulham at home, Southampton away, West Ham away, Brentford at home, Man United away, Wolves at home. From now until game week 14, there is hardly any games there, you could probably even say none, where you'd be worried about playing McNeil as a cheap option to enable funds to be spent elsewhere. Because he's not suddenly better than like most of your £7-8 million midfielders, but he is what he is. A 5.4 million option that plays 90 minutes pretty much every single game and also can get you attacking returns as well. Now, interestingly, in the first 2 games he played on the left. In the last 2, he's played more central as a number 10. I don't know whether that's going to continue, but that's where the returns have come from. If he moves back to the left, it doesn't mean that he's, not able to get returns. We've seen plenty in the past, but perhaps that move to number 10 is something that we need to keep an eye on. But he's fairly consistent, right? Last year, 3 goals, 8 assists. Year before that, 7 goals, 5 assists. His underlying numbers are not great for goal threat, but he will get you the odd goal. And he's definitely capable of getting assists as well. And he plays 90 minutes every single game. So if you think about other players around that price, like Sharda, for example, he could be great playing number 9 for Brentford. He may also get rotated at times. Morgan Rogers could be great because he keeps playing number 10. Is he as nailed as Dwight McNeil moving forward? Probably not. And also, he's got no returns so far. So Dwight McNeil is one of those options in FPL that is ultra boring. The 6 and 12 points is probably not going to continue at that level every single week. But he's a solid, consistent player that could be useful when you're trying to spend your money elsewhere. And no matter whether you're going Haaland or Salah or both or neither, whatever it is, money is quite tight this season. You need players like this. So I think he has been overlooked and will probably continue to be overlooked in the most part. But I think he is quite a nice cheap option. I just think unless you're wildcarding or trying to fund a move for another player, there's probably no rush to bring him in. So what are your thoughts on transferring Haaland out for Arsenal to get Salah and then wildcarding him back in for game week 6? Now, in theory, I don't mind that. That is a move that I looked at a few weeks ago as a potential option. So something like Haaland to Watkins or Solanke and then upgrade one of my midfielders to Salah. now we've got to game week 5, I'm feeling a little bit different because I've got Fernandes and Isak in my team that aren't returning massively. I could sell one of them to fund the Salah move, and Haaland's in such good form that I don't mind playing him against Arsenal. But if it was a choice between the two, I would rather have Salah than Haaland for this week only. Moving forward, I prefer Haaland, but for game week 5, I think it's Salah. The only thing to consider is how much money you're going to have spare when you wildcard, because I've looked at wildcard 6 drafts and they're all very tight on money. And there's not a huge amount of players that I want to compromise on. And if you've got Haaland at 15 million, he's already at 15.2. So if you sell him now, you'll get to sell him for 15.1. And you can check this in the FPL page, by the way. So if you go to transfers and click on list view, and I go to Haaland, so PP is price paid, 15 million. CP is current price, 15.2. And then SP is selling price, 15.1. So if I sell him this week, I get 15.1 for him. And then if I want to buy him back, it's going to cost me 0.1 million. Now, I know in the grand scheme of things, 0.1 is nothing, but money is going to be tight on that wildcard 6. And also, he's quite close to another price rise. So if he goes up to 15.3, you've then got to pay 0.2 million to get him back. Now, if he doesn't rise in price before Saturday, then you can sell him, and then you can get him straight back on wildcard, and it's only that 0.1. But if he goes up to 15.3 before that, it costs you a little bit more to buy him back. And he's not going to drop in price, right? No one's selling Erling Haaland right now, apart from maybe 1 week punts only. But if he goes up to 15.3 before game week 6, he's not going to suddenly drop to 15.2 or 15.1. So in theory, I don't mind it because I do think Salah is the better option. I would rather captain him. And if that's your only route to get Salah, I will consider it. But look at what your wildcard 6 draft looks like and see how tight the money is. You do not want to be left in a position where you can't get a Haaland back. And I know on a wildcard you can easily do it, but you might have to compromise on players that you don't really want to. So let me know in the comments below, are you going to sell Haaland to get Salah? I think after 8 goals in 3 games, people like myself are going to be a lot more put off that move than maybe they were a few weeks ago. But let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed that, give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcasts, rate 5 stars and leave a review. All of that is much appreciated, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the team selection video.